welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to picture this. You've just heard a truly fantastic, logically sound argument. I mean, the data checks out perfectly, the reasoning is entirely flawless, and you're just nodding along in complete agreement. But right before you can actually vocalize your support, your opponent leans in, smirks, and says, "Yeah, but do you have any idea who funded that study? Do you know what news network reported that?" And boom, in an instant, the entire conversation is derailed. Now, obviously, we naturally distrust bad people, but the thing is, even bad people can make perfectly logical arguments. So today, we're going to explore exactly why attacking where an idea came from is a massive analytical blind spot, and we're going to do it by breaking down the precise mechanics of this mental trap. You see, there's this stark contrast between focusing on actual facts and flawless logic versus using a total misdirection by obsessing over who funded the data. Manipulative debaters absolutely love this pivot. When they know they can't defeat the facts, they suddenly shift the entire focus to the origin. And just like that, the truth is thrown right out the window. It's basically a sleight of hand. They completely bypass the actual evidence and make the whole debate about the history or the character of whoever provided the information in the first place. So let's get right into it by looking at our first major section, the problem, attacking the origin. To truly understand why this is such a roadblock in our critical thinking, we have to look at how our brains actually process trust. When we encounter new information, our brain immediately looks for shortcuts. Trusting or distrusting the source is just one of those shortcuts. But relying on it entirely, that creates a massive analytical blind spot. And that blind spot has a name, the genetic fallacy. This happens when you judge something as good or bad purely on the basis of where it comes from or from whom it comes. Instead of looking at the actual argument or the data presented, you just attack the history, the origin, or the messenger. Honestly, it is an intellectually lazy trick. It completely abandons the hard work of verifying facts in favor of taking an easy, cheap shot at the messenger. We constantly see this split between the claim and the origin in modern media and business. For example, imagine you're discussing a really positive new business practice implemented by Amazon. Your opponent might immediately shut you down, judging the entire company purely because the CEO, Jeff Bezos, happens to be left-leaning and owns a left-leaning newspaper. Notice what happened? They didn't actually refute your point about the business practice at all. They just attacked the source, or consider the news. You might not be a fan of a specific network like CNN, and you might know for a fact they've made mistakes in the past. But if you dismiss literally everything they report moving forward without ever checking the current evidence, well, you're falling face first into the genetic fallacy. You are judging the claim purely by its origin. Let me just stop right here and ask you a direct, honest question. Has your tribalism hijacked your logic? Seriously, be honest with yourself for a second. Have you ever secretly rejected a perfectly valid statistic or a totally solid argument just because it was shared by a political party, a network, or an influencer that you absolutely despise? It happens to the best of us, it really does. But recognizing it is the very first step to overcoming it.
Which brings us right to our next section, the agitation, guilt by association.
Why does this matter so much? Because allowing origins to dictate the truth drives data analysts absolutely crazy, and it causes you to essentially surrender your own critical thinking to prejudice. This toxic tactic often escalates into what's called guilt by association. This is when a debater tries to discredit an idea simply because it's shared by a group of people that the audience deems bad, mad, or just undesirable. Manipulators use this, along with ad hominem attacks on a person's character, because, frankly, it is so much easier to just say, well, those awful people believe it, so it must be false, than it is to actually do the hard work of proving the idea wrong with real data.
And this leads us to a very uncomfortable truth. Bad people sometimes have correct beliefs. I know, it's a brutal, logical reality check. But even notorious liars can state objective truths. If an awful person says the sky is blue or that 2 + 2 = 4, their bad character doesn't somehow make the math incorrect. Even worse for our egos, sometimes people we strongly dislike actually make really good, structurally sound arguments. If a notorious liar tells you that the sky is blue, looking at their terrible track record of lying doesn't suddenly make the sky turn neon green. The truth does not physically change just because the messenger is incredibly flawed. If you let manipulative debaters trick you into playing this source game where you only ever accept facts from totally pristine messengers, you are going to completely lose sight of reality.
Think about it like this. You know the old saying, a broken clock is right twice a day. But if you suffer from the genetic fallacy, you'd basically take a hammer and smash that broken clock at exactly 12 just to prove a point about the clock being broken. It's absurd, right? Evaluating where something comes from is totally fine for context, but it can never ever replace the evaluation of actual evidence.
So how do we actually fix this? Let's transition to our final section, the solution, the content isolation framework.
I'm going to introduce you to a highly actionable strategy designed specifically to defeat the genetic fallacy and stop this guilt by association trap right in its tracks. We use a 3-step content isolation framework. Step 1 is to separate the message from the messenger. Step 2 is to force evidence evaluation. And Step 3 is to call out the fallacy directly. By following these steps, you successfully decouple the claim from the person making it, which forces the debate right back into the realm of facts. Let's break these down one by one.
Step 1. Separate the message from the messenger. The absolute worst thing you can do when an opponent attacks a source is to start defending the source's character. The very moment you do that, you are no longer debating the facts, you're debating history. Instead, use this exact phrase. We can argue about this track record later, but right now, let's look at the specific data. This isolates the claim and builds a solid wall between the data and all the drama. Once you've built that wall, you move to Step 2, force the evidence evaluation. You have to calmly remind your opponent that a flawed source can still present a perfectly valid fact. You look right at them and deploy this exact sentence. Tell me exactly what is wrong with their methodology. See, you are acknowledging their dislike for the source, but you're forcing them to actually evaluate the evidence. If they want to prove the argument false, they have to prove the math wrong, regardless of who funded it.
Finally, Step 3, call out the fallacy. If they stubbornly refuse to look at the data and just keep attacking the origin, you have to publicly label their manipulative tactic. You simply tell them, you are committing the genetic fallacy because you don't have the facts to refute the actual point. This exposes their strategy immediately and makes it crystal clear to anyone watching that they have completely abandoned logical debate.
Because the crucial point is this: a genuine debate focuses on the argument, not the person. We absolutely must demand actual evidence to bypass our own prejudices and the prejudices of others. If we really want to arrive at the truth, we have to ensure that our conversations are logically sound and focused entirely on the content, not the container it came in. I want to leave you with an ultimate psychological cheat code for shutting down a source-obsessed debater. If the worst person in the entire world says 2 + 2 = 4, do you start believing it equals 5 just to disagree with them? Of course not. That would be completely irrational. Which leads us to our final takeaway, the golden rule of surviving the genetic fallacy. Address the math, not the man. The very next time you find yourself entirely dismissing an idea, I want you to ask yourself, am I actually rejecting the data, or am I just fighting a ghost from the person's past? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your logic sharp, and I'll see you next time.